Before the start of the First Balkan War, the Tsar of Bulgaria, Tsar Ferdinand, had the desire to take the city of Istanbul, also known as Constantinople, and use it to restore the Byzantine Empire with himself as the emperor. Surrounding lands from the Balkans and the Anatolian Peninsula, including lands in modern-day Macedonia, and lands surrounding the Strait of Gibraltar. Had this happened in our timeline, Bulgaria would have quickly made Constantinople its capital and would have moved a large part of its government to the city. This would have soon backfired, as the Russians, the British, and the French would have demanded that Constantinople became a free international zone, so any monetary gain that the Bulgarian government was hoping to gain would have been removed. Soon, the Ottoman Empire would have declared war on Bulgaria during the Second Balkan War. With the aims of taking Constantinople from the Bulgarians, the Ottomans would have allied with the Greeks and the Serbians, and potentially Russia could have joined the side of the Bulgarians, leading to an alternative World War I. More than likely, however, the Russians would have also allied themselves against the Bulgarians had Bulgaria refused to give up Constantinople. This would have most likely resulted in the Bulgarians losing the city and a large part of their government, leading to a military dictatorship within Bulgaria, which eventually would have led to the country being surrounded. The Bulgarians would make a last stand in the city of Edirne, which the Bulgarians called Odrin, and that would be really the only gain that they would get, losing almost the same territories as they did in our own timeline. Tsar Ferdinand would have been dethroned and Tsar Boris III would have become the ruler of Bulgaria a few years earlier. However, this idea of creating a Neo-Byzantine Empire wouldn't simply die. This idea would have been carried all the way through the First World War. In an alternative timeline, one in which Bulgaria wins alongside with the Germans, the new Byzantine Empire could have been established. And this is exactly what we're going to explore. I want my Greek viewers and other viewers to know that Bulgaria did not see itself as the successor of the Byzantine Empire, nor did Bulgarians see themselves as Byzantine citizens. Nor did Bulgaria want to restore Yugoslavia as so many people say they did. Bulgaria sought out national unification with the rest of the Bulgarian people living in the Balkans, and afterwards probably either restore the territories of the First or the Second Bulgarian Empire, essentially become a stable country like France or Germany. That being said, this new Byzantine Empire would allow Bulgaria to get very close to that goal. I will not go into detail on exactly how Germany wins the war. So I'm gonna first of all say that the Zimmerman telegram never reached the Americans for one reason or another. Maybe it was never intercepted in the United Kingdom, or the United States simply decided never to join the war. Instead, Germany recruited soldiers from Eastern Europe, such as Ukraine and Lithuania, and from the Caucasus Mountains, creating new republics like Dagestan, Ossetia, and Bulgaria, and using them and their resources to help them on the Western Front. In our own timeline, the French managed to break through Bulgaria, and due to a lack of supplies like food and bullets, the Bulgarian army had no choice but to retreat. In this timeline, Bulgaria would be able to keep down the line. Without Bulgaria capitulating, Austria-Hungary also never capitulates. There is no uprisings in Austria-Hungary from Croats, Bosnians, Hungarians, and Ukrainians that collapse the country, meaning that the Ottoman Empire is also safe. So in this timeline, Germany is eventually able to take most of northern France and encircle Paris, or capture it until the French surrender. In a conference later on in 1919, where the peace treaty are decided, Tsar Ferdinand makes his suggestions to establish a new Byzantine Empire with himself as the emperor. His suggestion is eventually agreed upon, not because Tsar Ferdinand is a great Tsar or emperor or whatever, but because this new Byzantine Empire would serve as an extension of Germany. You see, the Bulgarian government back then and right now is extremely weak and extremely corrupt. They do not have the intellectual capabilities to control such a thing. However, Germany definitely does. And as such, the new Byzantine Empire will effectively be turned into a German vassal. Bulgaria's dispute over northern Dobruja would end. They would be given the entirety of that territory. Bulgaria would also likely be given Thessaloniki and the surrounding areas, starting the creation of the new Byzantine Empire. It would be very interesting and ironic. Bulgaria had fought the Byzantine Empire for over 500 years. Istanbul wouldn't be given to the Bulgarians in this timeline. Instead, Sofia would remain the Bulgarian capital. Now, in this new Byzantine Empire, ironically enough, the official languages would be German, Bulgarian, and Hungarian, but there wouldn't be a Greek official language. In fact, Greece would become a new principality of this new Byzantine Empire, and ironically enough, any Greek citizens would be considered lower class than the Bulgarian citizens, while the Byzantine elite citizens, consisting mostly of wealthy Bulgarian businessmen who would be given the title of nobles by the Germans, would be the elites of this new empire. New Byzantium will be created on the back of Bulgarian militarism, expanding it to make it a part of Bulgarian culture. Throughout this time, Romania would also be split into two parts, into Wallachia and into Bessarabia. Bulgaria would be given a lot of influence over Wallachia. As the 1920s would go on, new industrial sectors would be set into Bulgaria. New factories for creating weaponry and new shipbuilding factories along the coasts of Varna and Burgas. Soon the cities of Varna and Burgas would grow into these industrial centers. Unlike in our own timeline where these cities are now full of communist blocks, they would be full of German imperial-like architecture instead. In 1925, the first ever deals and contracts would start for the creation of the Bulgarian automobile, but this would still be in the conceptual state, as Bulgaria would now help Germany in its industry, helping build parts for tanks and cars for the German Empire. But this would be the start, the kicking off of Bulgaria's engine. The 1920s for this new Byzantine Empire would be catastrophic for Greece and Wallachia. Although Wallachia for now would be under Austro-Hungarian vassalage, it would later become a vassal of the new Byzantine Empire. It would be throughout the 1930s that the first new Byzantine colonies would be established. There would be small islands or small colonies off the coast of West Africa, which would be given to the new Byzantine Empire as more of these rewards that would be used by the Byzantine nobility, rather than them actually being proper colonies. However, this would also allow Bulgaria to develop its navy, and this new navy and this new military force would help the German Empire in its colonies in Africa. Rebellions against the Germans in Africa would be suppressed with the help of the new Byzantine army, which of course would often simply be referred to as the Bulgarian army. Greece would have very little of a role to play in this, as the Central Powers, now known as the Middle Europa Union, wouldn't desire to develop Greece. They would intentionally keep the Greeks poor, despite the fact that Greece was a more ideal site for the construction of ships. Greece would be drained to the ground. With its new prince, Kirill I, Greek resources would simply be extracted and used. Greece would be treated like a medieval kingdom of sorts, with very, very little economical development, and many Greeks would be encouraged to adopt a Bulgarian or Byzantine national identity. Although the Byzantine national identity would be preserved only for the rich Greeks. Many Serbian uprisings would have taken place, although not all of them armed as the Serbian people would be suppressed both in Bulgaria and Austria-Hungary, while the Croats would be given increasing amount of rights. Many Croats and Austrians and Germans and intellectuals would start to visit the new Byzantine Empire, helping set up educational programs for the average Bulgarian. The Bulgarians would begin to increasingly utilize the help of Turks living in Bulgaria alongside with Greeks. They would become the poor industrial class, while the Bulgarian government would go out of its way to destroy communities belonging to minorities such as gypsies. The Bulgarian government, already being as corrupt as it is, would have completely utilized this situation to its advantage. Greece would have slowly started to become akin to an African colony for the government. Considering, how they treated the actual Bulgarian people, I think it would be way worse for Greece. With the eventual rise of Tsar Boris III somewhere in 1943, this new Byzantine Empire would begin to be very good for the average Bulgarian. As in our own timeline, Tsar Boris III, at the very least, was a nationalist. The new Byzantine Empire would have predominantly started to adapt a new language, one which was based off on Latin and was supposedly the Byzantine language. And by the 1950s, there would have been this idea that the Bulgarians are these Romanized Thracians and simply came back to reunite with the Byzantines, or that the Bulgarians and the Byzantines are somehow connected, or that the Bulgarians in all Great Bulgaria were created by Byzantine immigrants. There would be some kind of propaganda, some kind of made-up lie, just like how in our own real history there's a bunch of lies. Some kind of justification to explain exactly why the new Byzantine Empire even existed. And the Greeks would be suppressed, and they will likely be even referred to as being related to the Albanians, or something, or being Turks or something like that. The same would also happen in Wallachia and Bessarabia and to Serbia, as the Serbians would be treated particularly harshly and would be forced to adopt the Bulgarian language. Newly constructed industrial centers in the 40s and the 50s would have put this new Byzantine Empire technologically decades ahead of our own real Bulgaria during this time, which was just recovering from the Second World War. Especially with the rise of Tsar Boris III, the Bulgarian parts of the new Byzantine Empire would become increasingly more industrialized, as Germans, Austrians, Ukrainians migrate into the Balkan Mountains, settling in new villages. Just like how the Germans settled in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia in our own timeline, Tsar Boris III would have completely changed Bulgaria into a new trajectory. The colonial efforts of the new Byzantine Empire, on the other hand, would be quite small. They would be, again, only limited to a few African colonies and a few colonies in the Caribbean. This would be due to the fact that the new Byzantine Empire was blocked. It was only in the Mediterranean and Black Seas. It didn't have access to the Red Sea or to the Horn of Africa. And even if it did, that would still limit its powers. Although Boris III would have had ambitions to make a Bulgarian colonial empire, it would never truly happen. It would be around Tsar Boris's time that Austria-Hungary would collapse somewhere in the middle of the 1950s, where Bulgaria would have joined the Liberation of Austria coalition, where the Bulgarians would finally gain full control of Wallachia and Bessarabia, effectively restoring the borders of the Second Bulgarian Empire during its height in 1241. Afterwards, the new Byzantine Empire would have replaced Austria-Hungary as Germany's second. As while the Ottoman Empire would exist, it would have primarily focused on staying hegemonous. The Ottomans by this point would split away from the Germans, having a very large sense of nationalism and pride. They would believe that they could be like the British after they left the European Union. They believed that they could have their own sphere of influence away from the Germans. It would be around the 50s and the 60s where the Russian Federative Republic would have started to gather its strength, conquering the majority of Manchuria, Korea, and Tibet, compensating for lands lost in Eastern Europe, and making new industrial breakthroughs. This would have been the start of a new Cold War between the Germans and the Russians, in which the new Byzantine Empire would start to play an increasing role, and the divisions between the various classes within the country would become even more exacerbated. The new chairman of the Council of Ministers, Ditilin Ozunov, would be the one to start the transition of power within New Byzantium, transitioning the power from the Bulgarian Tsar to the chairman of the Council of Ministers. New Byzantium would have truly become a reliable ally for the Germans, transitioning Bulgaria from what it was, a corrupt agrarian nation, into an industrial powerhouse. One of the largest signs of this trend would be the building of the Tsar Simeon rail line from the city of Varna all the way to the city of Ohrid. The establishment of the Bulgarian automobile properly this time, the establishment of the first ever Bulgarian airplanes, and the introduction of complex machinery and technology. This would be the time where Germany would develop the first ever, monarchist software. A German OS software for computers, made also in Germany, which would have been used by the Bulgarians, as in our own timeline, the Bulgarians in the 1960s and the 1970s had the Preslavets OS. In this timeline, similarly, the Bulgarians would become masters of the computer, would be one of the first monarchist nations in human history to develop an advanced computer. Eventually, with the death of Tsar Boris III somewhere in 1964, Tsar Simeon II would rise into power. In this timeline, Tsar Simeon wouldn't be the person he is in real life, proving a worthy successor of his father, being able to stabilize the new Byzantine Empire and even make that national idea of being a new Byzantine citizen a part of Bulgarian culture. By this point in the 1970s and the 1980s, the new Byzantine Empire would have been known globally throughout this point. It would have been known all the way to Japan and South America, where even some Argentinians would emigrate in this timeline, unlike in our own where it was the opposite, where many Europeans migrated to Argentina. In the late 1980s, a revolution would have started in Ukraine, which would explode into the Second World War, going all the way from 1988, devastating the entire world and ending up with the new Byzantine Empire being destroyed. Bulgaria would end up becoming a part of the Russian Federative Republic's sphere of influence, where Bulgaria would become a republic just like in our own timeline, except with a few more lands and a few less, potentially losing all of the Rugia to the Romanians, as well as keeping Macedonia. It will be turned again into a combination of an agrarian and industrial power, which is what the Russians will do in this timeline. Bulgaria would be severely punished around the 1990s and the early 2000s, and it will be only throughout the 2010s that the nation will begin to recover. The legacy of New Byzantium would only be Tsar Simeon somewhere far away on an African island still ruling the colonies of New Byzantium. The same would be for Germany, as Germany would have survived somewhere in Papua New Guinea, with the last German Kaiser living there and still desiring to restore the empire. But these would be only remnants, as the official governments of the world would be mostly democratic. Although Bulgaria would still walk out of this with a much larger population, roughly around 14.5 million people, a lot of which would still be Germans and others. The new Byzantine Empire and the lies they had made, the idea that the Bulgarians and the Byzantines were connected, would be completely removed. With Serbia, Croatia, and other nations being restored, Bulgaria would be pushed towards the idea that it was a South Slavic nation, and potentially its future could have been to be a part of a different version of Yugoslavia. However, these things are left uncertain. The biggest impact here, however, would be the impact on Greece and Romania. An entire century under Bulgarian rule would have shaped these countries to hate Bulgaria way more than they did in our own timeline. At the end of it, Bulgaria would be only slightly different than it was in our own timeline. But if anything, Bulgaria would be way more developed. It would be what Bulgaria could have been had communism never fell within the country, more specifically the Bulgarian version of communism called Zhivkovism.